Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is April 2, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with John H. Else for part 2. Thank you, John.
Hey, it's great to be back. Great to be back. I had a ball last time.
Me too. That's the important thing, to have fun.
Yeah.
So, John, what first attracted you to pursuing filmmaking? Your parents are these artists in New York. You're seeing films in movie theaters or on TV. And where did you go, hey, I want to do that?
When I was coming up in the world, being a filmmaker, let alone a documentary filmmaker, that was not a job description. You take those aptitude tests in high school. You want to be a nuclear physicist, you want to be a bus driver, a nurse, you want to be a spy. Filmmaker was not on that list. So I came to it late. I watched movies growing up. Sure, there was nothing else to watch. I actually predate television, if you can believe that. I remember the very first movie I ever saw. I was about 5 years old, and my dad took me to see a Bob Hope movie. And somehow in that film, Bob Hope ended up in the water with a shark, and he was fighting the shark. And I did not understand that it wasn't real. And I just vividly remember yelling and screaming and crying. And my dad finally had to take me out in the lobby because I didn't get it. I didn't understand that. I'm not even sure I understood what fiction was. I must have, because we read, Grimm's fairy tales. But this is my first movie. So I guess you could say I've always been really, really interested in what's real and what's not in movies. I got involved in documentary film in a curious way. I was a failed still photographer. I had tried to, I wanted to be the new Cartier-Bresson. I wanted to be the new Robert Capa. I wanted to be, you name it. And it was the 1960s. There was a lot of hellacious violence going on in the world. I tried to be a street photographer during the uprisings in France. It was Berkeley. I was in Berkeley. Tried to be a street photographer during all the violence in Berkeley in the 60s, and I couldn't cut it. I just couldn't. I didn't have the stomach for it. The tear gas and the billy clubs, and so got out of college. I needed to earn a living. Newly married, still married, by the way, to my first wife. I've been married, 63 years now, something like that. So I got a job in a film processing lab. This was in the old days where, in order to make a moving image, you had to actually go out and buy 16 millimeter film or 35 millimeter film, run it through a camera, a Bolex maybe. So I worked in a processing lab in Palo Alto, and we had the weirdest portfolio of stuff that we processed. We did a lot of stuff for NASA. We did a lot of stuff for the Air Force. We did a little bit of nuclear testing stuff. We did a lot of educational films, like Nutrition and You, or a classic educational film by Cy Wexler called In Your Own Backyard.
Yeah.
God bless Cy Wexler, who made great kids films back in the day. But as part of my job, I had to watch these films over and over and over and over again. And, if you watch the same movie 500 times, you can actually learn a lot. It was the time of the French New Wave was going nuts. It was the time of the early, the heyday, actually, of original cinema verite. The Maisels and Fred Wiseman and Ricky Leacock and Barbara Koppel were going nuts out there. And so, but that did not get me into documentary. I actually went to film school at Stanford in the late 60s. It was an interesting class, by the way. My class at grad school at Stanford had Walter Parks, who went on to be a major producer in Hollywood. Patrick Crowley, who's now Steven Spielberg's producer. A whole bunch of really, really, really good good filmmakers. And I was interested in fiction film.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I wanted to be a DP.
Wow.
And, coming from a visual family where we lived, breathed, ate, farted visuals, that's what we did. I wanted to be a DP. And I worked on, some really, really lousy B movies early on. And a little bit of nonfiction. My very first nonfiction was right out of film school when I fancied myself to be, the new Haskell Wexler. I got a job filming sleep apnea at a sleep clinic at Stanford with the wonderfully named Dr. Dement. Bill Dement was the pioneer of sleep research. And so instead of, directing my first feature film, I would go over to the medical center when the sun went down, and I'd set up my camera and I'd film these people snoring. That was, and that's literally what I did. I also filmed some narcoleptic dogs. As I recall, they had raised a colony of narcoleptic dogs who would get all excited and they would collapse in a deep, deep, deep sleep. So that was my introduction to nonfiction. The fiction stuff just didn't interest me because I was stuck sort of in the cesspool of lousy B movies with C-grade actors, through no fault of their own, and lousy scripts, and the directors weren't that good. So I walked away. I wasn't that good at it. That's a hell of a tenure track, that DP tenure track. And only the strong survive. I was not strong, so I walked away from it. Actually, it walked away from me. I was not going to make it. I also noticed I'd go out on the road on these films, and I'd noticed to be a crew of like 50 people, and I was the only one who was still happily married to his first wife. Literally, invariably.
Yeah.
And we had these wonderful little kids, and I thought, there's a lot of reasons maybe not to do this. I got to work with some great directors. I shot, I think, Roger Vadim's last film for Fairy Tale Theater. There was this wonderful strand called Fairy Tale Theater, created by Shelley Duvall with Jonathan Taplin as the executive producer, and it was all fairy tales.
Yep.
John Taplin and Shelley Duvall somehow managed to get all these stars and star directors to, to participate in these films. And they were, little 3-day shoots. Got to work with LeVar Burton, worked with Stan Lathan as your director, wonderful African-American director who went on to have a great career in television. Anyhow, and I just found that documentary was just so much more exciting because, in my fiction work, I'd be doing 15 takes of the same, sort of botched bad line from a mediocre script. And in documentary, the fastball is coming and you got to hit it. You only get one shot. You don't get to ask the clipper ship to go back to one. You got to get it the first time around. You don't get to ask the coal miners to fight, with the strike breakers again. You don't get to ask the fire crew to, where you start that controlled burn once again. And I just loved the aliveness of that. It's a fastball, and then the next one's a curveball, and then there's a knuckler. And you got to be just, completely on your toes in the real world, the real unfolding world over which you have no control.
It's amazing, John, because I asked Haskell Wexler all these same questions once. I was lucky. And also Frank Zappa was on Fairy Tale Theater also.
Oh, all right.
So lots there.
Let me say a word about Haskell. I was working on voter registration in Mississippi on the staff of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1964, the fall of 64. And I was working in the Atlanta office, actually, and going back and forth to Mississippi. And there was this wonderful guy who showed up one day. who was making a film about civil rights, and it was Haskell Wexler. I had no idea who Haskell Wexler was. I had no idea that you could actually be a filmmaker. I'd never met a filmmaker, and he had all this equipment with him. He stored his equipment in my office. We went out to lunch. He had just shot The Loved One.
Oh my God! What a film.
Wonderful film about the funeral industry. And I think it was probably meeting Wexler when I first thought, I could do this. Maybe I could do this, because
that was the kickover.
Say what?
That was like the tipping point.
Yeah. And Wexler did plenty of nonfiction. I mean, he's known as America's greatest fiction cinematographer, but he did a lot of nonfiction also. Anyhow, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that was good, because it's very important, because his mom helped finance The Loved One and Medium Cool. And he's, Medium Cool is such an amazing film, because people go, there's a scene in it that he didn't stage, and then they go, well, I kind of staged it, and it's that real and unreal thing where what we will get into now in docs. So then you find your niche. You find your niche of being a documentary filmmaker and a teacher. So before we go into the teaching part, a screenwriting teacher told me that great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're making something like The Day After Trinity? Because that is a film that you directed, right? You were you were head of that film.
Well, I had a lot of help from David Webb Peoples.
Okay.
And his wife, Janet. David Webb Peoples, as you recall, is the writer of Blade Runner.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of fantastic screenwriting. Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
Well, there's intention. There is making your intent visible in your work, and then there's transparency. And I think there are two different things. In fiction, I'm with Kubrick. I don't need to know, that Bertolt Brecht had a process. I don't need to see a shot of Stanley Kubrick in the mirror while he's, doing Full Metal Jacket. But I have come around to feel that in documentary, transparency is critical. Transparency is everything. We purport to traffic in the truth. We in our best moments, we're putting on the screen things that are based in real evidence, and they're based in world facts. But we're the ones who are putting it up there. So starting actually with The Day After Trinity, I always have a hint of myself in the movie. I don't do them as autobiographical. I could have said, when I was growing up, I never heard of Robert Oppenheimer. But you hear my voice asking questions in that film. I think in every film I've made since then, you hear my voice a lot of times answering the question. Occasionally, if it's a verite film, I have a new film coming out in the fall, and there's a couple shots of me in the mirror, just sort of incidental. I'm just kind of there. I don't mind seeing a boom in the frame once in a while. There are times in nonfiction when you want to invite the viewer to go down into the fever dream with you.
Yeah.
And those are times when I treat it exactly as a fever dream, that it's a, this, plastic world that you go into. It's a complex of sound and image and verbiage that just transports you to another world. But I don't know. Anyhow, I think I got way off the question.
No, you did, because I wanted to read you. Then when you worked on Eyes of the Prize, you actually said this: under Henry Hampton's leadership, 6-hour-long Eyes of the Prize episodes came to believe that, quote, if you're going to make a documentary about Christ, you better interview the Antichrist.
Who said that? Did I say that?
You said it. It's implied here that
Yes.
he
Yeah.
says, yeah, you said it in one of these online interviews,
Yeah.
either in print or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's interesting about this idea of intention.
Yep.
And so that's what I just wanted you to explore this bias and in the balancing of the bias.
Yeah. Well, it's not so much about balancing. It's about the fact that very often, always, the bad guy makes the story more interesting.
Yeah.
And I have come to believe, and I used to hammer into my students, that if you're going to do a film about a good guy, the first phone call you should make is to the bad guy. Yeah. I mean, when I was in the prize,
yeah,
we interviewed a lot of bad guys. We got the sheriff of Selma, Alabama on camera. We got the sheriff of Birmingham, Alabama. We got George Wallace. It was the very last interview we did. George Wallace, who was at the time the Antichrist of the civil rights movement. And you find out a couple of things that I think are critical, not only to documentary film, but also to being, a human being and a citizen. You find out that given the right circumstances, that could be me.
Yeah.
If I had grown up in Alabama and I had never known anything but racist vitriol around the kitchen table my whole life, that could have been me.
Yeah.
And Dave Peoples, when we were doing The Day After Trinity, we had a lot of discussions and arguments about Robert Oppenheimer and good and evil and intent and was it the right thing to do or not the right thing to do? And Dave, I remember one day said, when the SS officer got up in the morning, he did not get up in the morning with the intent of doing evil.
Yeah.
And that's always stuck with me. The other thing you find is that if enough history has passed, I mean, we did Eyes on the Prize about 25 years out from the classic civil rights movement, from the Voting Rights Act of 65 and from all the, the chaos and hellacious goings on in, between 57 and 64 in the Deep South. And what you do when you talk to the bad guys, you find out very often that they have changed.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a genuine change. Sometimes it's bullshit. Sometimes they know that they risk being on the wrong side of history. In the case of George Wallace, he had been born again. He had come to Jesus. He had phoned up John Lewis to apologize.
Wow.
Whether he meant it or not, only George Wallace knows, and he's in heaven, so he can't tell us. Well, so he can't tell us. When I did a film about water in the American West, which represent the manipulation of water in the West, the replumbing of the Western landscape, represents the greatest transformation of any landscape on the face of the earth. And we did it as a nation with great intent. We took the rivers and we dammed them and we made them flow backwards, and we irrigated dry deserts to produce cotton and to produce food. And it was an incredible engineering job, and the price was paid by the environment big time, and we're paying the price for it now. But the very first phone call I made when I got the funding for that series was to the guy who built all the dams, this extraordinary man named Floyd Dominy, who was the Commissioner of Reclamation. I mean, it's the Bureau of Reclamation is an agency of the federal government that most people have never heard of. If you drive anywhere around the American West and you look down in a riverbed and there's just a trickle going on, and the river has all been diverted into a big dam to run big generators that run the air conditioning in Phoenix, Arizona, or to raise export cotton in the Central Valley of California. Well, Floyd Dominy is the guy who built those dams. And I called him up and I said, look, we're making this movie. And you don't come off too well in the book on which this movie's based. And he said, let's talk.
Wow.
And he was absolutely riveting. He was absolutely stood by the courage of his convictions of having turned nature on its head in the West. He was, as far as I know, he didn't try to hide anything. And he, in some ways, is the most interesting person in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go to the original, well, I was going to compare Creed with Rocky. I mean, Creed's almost as interesting as,
but this is really interesting, John, because it's exactly, when Bill Clinton called up Amy Goodman when Al Gore was running for president the day of, she, and I respect Amy, and I think she's very good. I listen to her first 10 minutes every day religiously. Yep. But she kind of tried to bust Bill on the spot about Gulf of Tonkin when he's just calling up, sort of being friendly, like, well, get your people out there to vote. And she starts trying to bust him. And he walked all over her, in my opinion, because he's president. He knows how to talk these people. Then Naomi and Amy had Alan Greenspan on once, and they tried to bust him, and he walked all over them. Yeah. So how do you find... I mean, it's a talent. I mean, just talk about how you say, go to the end or go to the bad guy and let them talk. And sort of is your motive to let them put their foot in their own mouth. Don't force feed them or go, this guy did bad. You kind of want them to well, I'm not saying you. One seems as though a successful doc would get them to put their foot in their own mouth without being prompted. So how, any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not, I don't do prosecutorial documentaries. And I think my job and Amy Goodman's job are different.
I see. Okay.
To keep the world from going nuts today.
Yeah.
And Amy Goodman's job is to expose lies and to expose malfeasance and to expose bad policy. I think, my job, this is not true for all documentary makers, but I find my job is more to let people tell their story.
Yeah.
If they're I'm really interested in why they did something that we would consider bad. I said bad guys. I should have said people that most of us.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, that's
good. And I think if you take a non-prosecutorial approach from at the outset, and let them know and somehow communicate to them that, you really want to hear what they have to say.
Yeah.
I mean, Crumb is an interesting example. I did some of the camera work on Crumb. Maurice Alberti did the vast majority of it. But, I mean, Robert Crumb's a kind of a disgusting individual. And the world is full of disgusting, brilliant artists. They start with Richard Wagner, and Terry Zwigoff, who directed the film about Crumb, was a friend of Crumb's. He was, Robert Crumb felt very comfortable with Terry, and so Crumb was willing to talk quite openly. About his sexual hangups and about how dysfunctional his family is and about his politics. And I think the film was better for it. Terry actually included in the film about Crumb an interview. God, I'm blanking on her name now. Deirdre.
One of the film, one of the art people.
Yeah, no, it's a critic, Deirdre. I'll think.
Right.
Let's come back to that.
Right, but she what did she basically? You're saying that Crumb succeeded because it was more to the viewer saying you decide.
Yeah, exactly. You decide.
Yeah. And that's very interesting. So your tool is a moving image camera, whether it's film or video.
Mm-hmm.
McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. So knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera or projector extends our eyelid. It may be non-tangible like Religion or philosophy extends consciousness. Who knows?
Yeah.
What does the moving image camera extend for you? What humanness?
Well, that's interesting. I think we talked last time about how the camera actually extends a force field.
A force field.
Yeah, it doesn't simply record what's in front of it. And as a practitioner, as someone who sits down with people year after year with them on camera, you can see it operating. You can see that, this person is going to behave differently when the camera's rolling, and they know it, than when it's not rolling. So that's what I mean by a force field.
Yeah.
When we're doing cinema verite, occasionally we'll experience people doing things they really should not do and probably would not do if the camera wasn't there. It's the whole jackass phenomenon. Um,
You mean, wait, do you mean Jackass as in the Johnny Knoxville series film Jackass?
yeah, people doing stupid, dangerous stuff because the camera is there. And I think, so, the camera sometimes prompts bad behavior.
That's amazing, because I have this other thing about Jackass, because I had no interest in seeing it. And then one day I watched my brother's son was watching it, and we just sort of sat there and watched it. We, as two brothers, we never laughed so hard in our lives. We were laughing so hard. It was this joyous thing. But I was like, why are we laughing at this? So then I studied the phenomenon of Buster Keaton doing pratfalls, not really intentionally hurting himself. He learned through vaudeville to do a pratfall that potential of hurting himself might be a good career for him, and he's the best. Then comes along Chris Burden, this 70s artist or 80s or 70s performance artist who had himself shot and did things to his body. And he kind of told the guy, hey, shoot my arm, but just miss. And the guy hit him. And then he's in Esquire as being the new artist, and he had this amazing career. And I do recommend people to see the documentary Burden, because you see he's not a kook who's hurting his body. But then you take that through line to Jackass. These guys are absolutely fucking nuts, and they are out of their minds, and they've hurt their body to make this money. Yeah. Like, why would you? So I'm just, that was heavy. You brought up this thing of, I guess it's more what you're talking about is, why does the audience see it, watch this?
Was it Laurie Anderson who said it's not the bullet that hurts you, it's the hole?
She said that about Chris. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, if there are people who write doctoral dissertations about this, and at least some of them conclude that most humor is about bad stuff happening to other people. Laurel and Hardy. Why do we laugh when someone falls downstairs? I don't know if you've ever fallen downstairs, but there's nothing humorous. So,
well, that's Buster. He turned a stumble into a dance. Yeah. But then, you said this, John, and I'm really amazed, because McLuhan said there's no such thing as a good or a bad film. It's a good or a bad viewing experience. And you have a quote that says, never mistake a good time for a good film, which is almost the opposite. But I'm curious.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's what I want. I'm just compare and talk about those two statements.
Well, they're about two different people. McLuhan's talking about the audience. Okay, about and I agree with McLuhan completely.
Okay.
If you go to a movie and you have a good time, then you can check the box. It's a good film. Yeah. When I said never confuse a good film with a good time, that is again a quote from my favorite philosopher, David Webb Peoples, who labored away as an editor in the basement of a trucking company in Emeryville, California, with Errol Morris making his first film right next door.
Yeah.
And David would sit in this dark basement, and the producers and directors would bring in film for him to edit, and they would talk about how great it was. And what he realized was that they had a great time out in the field. You know, they fell in love. They went to these fancy restaurants. They they got to climb up the volcano. They dodged a bullet. They got the great shot without getting shot. It was an adventure, and they confused their experience with, this crap that they had gotten on film.
I
I
see.
felt it myself. I've felt it myself where I've been in situations where you just are so alive from the fever dance in which you're immersed, that you think the shot you're getting is great. And I one of the first gigs I ever had as a young freelancer was to film a childbirth. And at the end of the night, I was just so happy with this great stuff I had gotten. When the editor looked at the stuff, the shots were like a half second long. The time in the intensity of that delivery room had expanded and contracted, and I had not done my job as a good cinematographer, and a lot of the stuff was frankly unusable. So I had confused an intense time with intense.
Yeah.
I saw it a lot with graduate students. A lot of these young people didn't have a lot of life experience. And so they'd head out to Ethiopia, or we had students go to Iraq and Afghanistan during when those wars were on. They'd come back and they had these great stories, and very often they had just crappy footage.
Yeah. Really good, John. Thank you so much. This is so fun, and I learned so much. And, this is McLuhan also in 57 saying, it's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. The distinction merely relieves people of the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So the key is the last line. Here's McLuhan trying to be linear. It's always been true. Well, that's a hesitant. Has always been true. And then the key is whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Well, what does effectively mean? So, just your thoughts of is there a difference between education and entertainment?
Well, I mean, you reminded me why I was so excited by McLuhan when he first started writing, and then why I stopped reading him.
That is the right answer right there, John.
Yeah, I mean, what did Winston Churchill say? The young man who is not a socialist has no heart, and the old man who is a socialist has no brain.
Wait, who said that?
I think it was Churchill. I mean,
oh my God, I love that.
Great line. You're not sure who said it.
Yeah,
probably Churchill.
Yeah.
Well, we struggle with this all the time, because documentary makers and increasingly fiction filmmakers, we're dealing with events that actually unfolded in the real world.
Yeah.
And you can make a decidedly boring film about nuclear weapons that's like being held underwater for 2 hours, or you can go out and you can make Chris Nolan's Oppenheimer, which is a thoroughly entertaining, it's a 3-hour, really serious popcorn movie. And, God bless Chris Nolan for doing it. When you begin looking closely at, does accurate history matter going forward, as a civilization or as an individual? I think it does. The entertainment is often fighting against veracity. It's fighting against what actually happened in the world. I mean, you go back, we can talk about the great debates that happen around Oliver Stone's films, around JFK and other films of his. So I think it's an uneasy alliance. We have to get people to watch these films. We have to get people to read these books. To look at these websites, to listen to this podcast. And if they're not entertaining, if they're off-putting, nobody's going to. And then we try to, by stealth, sneak in as much what we deem to be important history. I mean, Eyes in the Prize is a really interesting example of that, because Eyes in the Prize is 6 films about, it's actually 14 films by the end, about the classic civil rights movement, about, voter registration and Rosa Parks and all the kind of iconic stuff. And Eyes in the Prize, the series, is based on some sort of principles of how do you change America. One is voter registration, one is legal, legal action in the courts, the NAACP legal fund. Another is direct action, around which there's a whole body of philosophy that, some of it written by King, some of it written by Gandhi. We never articulated those ideas, those theories up front. We always embedded them in some sort of a thriller. In talking about direct action in the face of this brutal segregation, we told the story of the Freedom Rides, which is a, white knuckles, hang on to your seat. It's a journey. I mean, it's like the Odyssey. It's like, a million journeys of people doing the right thing and getting in a hell of a lot of jeopardy because of it. And that's a case where I think the entertainment value, we didn't call it that, but the catnip of a good story, we could kind of use that to carry along this stowaway theory about why nonviolent action could work. Didn't always work. We also did some stories in which it didn't work.
Yeah.
In Georgia, for instance,
Well, John, you learned how to become an educator, and at some point you're working in the film world, and then you decide to be an educator. What's your tipping point there? And then how did you learn how to be an educator that will keep their attention? Because most people I talk to who are educators did not have a class that went, here's how you teach. They just said, you've learned a lot. You've seen your professors teach you. Now, how do you, what you just sort of said, you can't be boring. You got to kind of lure them in. You use the word catnip. So what was your tipping point then to become an educator? And then how did you learn how to be an educator?
Well, there was no tipping point. And when I started teaching, I never thought of myself as an educator. My dad was a professor, and he said, there's an old saying that among professors that those who can do,
Yeah.
those who can't do, teach, and those who can't teach education. So I never quit making movies. I did not hang up my cleats. I kept making movies. I could not teaching is really fucking hard, by the way.
Wow.
I had the benefit of teaching graduate students who were there by choice. It was a very selective program. We had the best and the brightest 25-year-olds in, North America, and we had a lot of foreign students. So that helped a lot, but it's supposed to look easy. You're supposed to, you walk into class maybe 30 seconds late, and you're supposed to be like, you just had lunch over at the faculty club with Nobel laureates. And, here's a couple of thoughts I had while I was walking over from the faculty club. When in fact, for me at least, it was hours of preparation before every class.
Yeah.
And I was making films. I was actually going out in the field weekly, monthly, all summer, and so I've structured a lot of the classes around my own mistakes in the field. Every time I went out to work on something. I did, while I was teaching at Berkeley, I did a couple of films about opera. I did a film about commodities traders in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I did a film about forest fires, bunch of stuff. And I would always make mistakes. I got pretty good at what I did over the years, but you always make mistakes. And I would always try to bring that up in class. And that seemed to be effective. It seemed to kind of open the door to letting people, be forthright about their own mistakes. I loved it. I mean, I loved the teaching. It was, I don't know what it was like. It was like, being there with the 12 apostles or, the Knights of the Round Table or something. It was so collegial, so much fun. And I learned as much from them. They never believed this. I told them this all the time. They never believed that. I learned almost as much from them as they learned from me.
Yeah.
Not quite as much. I mean, I still have the upper hand, but.
It's a reciprocal kind of Mobius strip. It's really amazing, or a cone. And, I talked with Michael Apted 40 years ago, and he actually made a doc on a Russian rock star. And I says, why do music video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? And most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but in the 80s it flourished because of MTV, to the point where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. So I asked this question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a question for the evolutionary biologists, the people who, and there are a lot of people who study exactly this. And there are doctoral dissertations out there about the number of cuts per hour in feature films, which skyrocketed from the, you do an inventory starting in 1948 and you go up through Michael Mann. I mean, the number of cuts per feature film goes from something like 400 up into the thousands. So it definitely has changed. I don't know. I mean, I've always been interested in Sesame Street, which I thought was just a brilliant use of public television. It's now, unfortunately, it's the commercial monster has eaten Sesame Street, and it's no longer on public television. It's in the commercial sphere. That's a different discussion. But Sesame Street was able to sort of increase the pace of what was on the screen in their shows, and that may have had something to do with priming a whole generation of folks, young folks. I don't know. I find it hard to believe that our innate ability, our biological ability, the wiring our brains is any different now than it was when Shakespeare was writing or when Eugene O'Neill was writing nice, long, slow soliloquies. I mean, I don't think it's a matter of, humans don't evolve that quickly. The brain chemistry and the brain wiring doesn't change that quickly.
Yeah. In fact, John, that's funny because I think Jim Henson is one of the great filmmakers that had a big influence on many people. That short film, we saw it in grade school, and we were like, whoa, that and Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. Those were the films we saw. Like that made an impact on us. It was a little different. But the real hidden question there, John, is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
Well, we claim to. I mean, I've written a novel with my right hand during the time we've been on camera. Thomas Jefferson claimed that he could write letters simultaneously.
Thomas Jefferson did?
Yeah, Jefferson, yeah, whether he did or not.
That's great.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it a good idea? Does each task suffer? I will say, during my years in documentary filmmaking, when I started out and through most of my career, the default film crew was at least two people, one to do audio and one to do sound.
Yeah.
In the days of film, we had a camera assistant. That was the all of those classic, Maisels and Leacock and, Barbara Koppel's films, those are all done with a 3-person crew. Sometimes the director is a different person, sometimes not. In my last years of teaching and over the last 15 years, there's a fallacy developed that people can do it with one person.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you that I've executive produced hundreds of these graduate student films in which people go out and they try to do both good camera work and good audio. Good audio. And both audio and sound always suffer 100% of the time.
Wow.
100% of the time. I've done it myself. I've tried to do, sometimes in situations where you can only have one person. I did a forest fire project for the New York Times a couple of years ago, and I had to do it myself, shooting and then, doing all the audio. And that multitasking with those machines, it just didn't work for me. No. I mean, I remember the moment in reality TV. I remember the first time I saw subtitles in a English language verite scene, and it was because the sound was shit, the recorded crap.
Yeah.
So I don't know about multitasking.
No, that's good. You really sussed it out, because it is, I'm after your guess and your hunch, and I love you said evolutionary biologist. So, we want to rely on data and people who do surveys, data, research, but you're coming from your experiential knowledge that you've tried this, and I want to talk about framing too, because I asked Bruce Bailey this too, and I said, how did you form your framing aesthetic? So both of us are framed the way we kind of should be, right? Our heads in the middle. Yeah. And all, since Zoom started, how about this one, John? I would do this sometimes.
This is John Morris.
Yeah. Yeah. And we know Robert Frank came along, you dropping those photographers' names, Robert Frank started framing stuff like this. How did you form your framing aesthetic? What do you think informed it?
Oh, I'm hopeless. I mean, I came out of, Renaissance painting and, I frame it like we frame this, once in a while, it's like daring for me to frame an interview like this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, whoa, else is going it's interesting. I watched Errol Morris's Pigeon Tunnel recently.
Oh, I want to see that.
Yeah, it's actually it's good. I mean, every one of Errol's films is worth the price of a ticket. I don't know with what he does, but you're always gonna find something that knocks your socks off.
Yeah,
fucking framing anarchy. That movie, mirrors within the frame. It's got and it's quite delightful. Does it detract and distract from the content? It may.
Yeah.
The rule of, here we are, we're both at the rule of thirds. If you divide the frame into thirds, my eyes are on the third. I think yours are about the third. It's the same old stuff. Mike Chin, wonderful documentary cinematographer, Mike Chin, started experimenting a few years back with Orlando Bagwell about having things slightly off.
Yeah.
Framing a little bit up, a little bit down. And it does, because there's a certain grammar that we all understand and we were raised with. Everything a little bit off does energize the frame. It's a little bit like, sticking one finger in a light socket. It tells you that something is unbalanced.
Yeah. It's good. It's a good point.
I mean, it's often gratuitous, though. It's often just
Does it do more good? Does it, the verb you chose was great. Does it energize the frame and draw you in to be more attentive? Like if you look, go back center. Move your head. No, there. Look at how the lighting in my room and your room sort of flows, makes the two, and it's been amazing. So This is what Bruce Bailey said. I said, how'd you form your framing aesthetic? Because most people don't go, because that's the history of Renaissance painting and photography, how they framed. So then we're going to transfer it to moving image art. He said, Cocteau said, we formed our framing aesthetic on the way you put the knife and fork down on the dinner table.
Oh, I like that.
Isn't that amazing? Because it is. Why, why do we follow these norms and then they become the way you get swooped in? Or when Robert Frank started framing off, did it swoop us more into it? So, it's a debatable thing.
It's interesting. If you look at Robert Frank's photography now, it does not seem out of the ordinary.
No.
We had become accustomed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you brought up the word anarchy so beautifully. You got ESP flips right into Utah Phillips saying that anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
Well, I'm asking you, John, because, it's funny because I do struggle with the wording. Who should make the rules? Well, we know who's entitled to make the rules, who makes the rules. That verb right there, I've struggled with, but people have said, just go with the entitled. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Yeah. Well, there are rules for ourselves and there are rules for other people.
Yeah.
And point of fact and point of reality, people who have power are entitled to make the rules. That doesn't make it right. Hitler was entitled to make rules in Nazi Germany. Pol Pot was entitled to make rules in Cambodia. Joe Biden is entitled to make rules for different reasons than Hitler, obviously. I'm entitled to make the rules about, do I want to set the table with the fork on the left or the fork on the right? That's my business. Yeah. So I think it depends, there's a continuum of it's not one set of rules that governs nations and families, and it's a bunch of different rules. I mean, I'm dodging your question. I'm a great believer in democracy. I've spent my whole life registering voters and making films that are about the expansion of democracy and being involved in political action that's about the expansion of democracy. So I think, in the big grand sense, the people who are entitled to make the rules are the people who got elected.
Yeah. No, that's what I was hoping. I ask these questions because I want to reinforce and energize my own beliefs. And I like people to say things that I want to hear, but I will also welcome them saying the opposite. But most people say who's entitled to make the rules? We all are, and that's what democracy is: participatory democracy or direct democracy. But you said an amazing thing anticipating this, because etymologically, the word freedom means giving oneself one's own rules, one's own laws. Mm-hmm. And the basic question I have to you is, what does freedom mean to you now? Because this is just to set it up. Here's T.S. Eliot. Freedom is only truly freedom when it appears against the background of an artificial limitation. That caused McLuhan to say, how are we to argue with people who insist on sticking their heads in the invisible teeth of technology, calling the whole thing freedom? I'm glad you're laughing, because it is wild.
Okay.
What does freedom mean to you now?
Okay, well, I'll see your 4 white males, and I'll up you one.
Up me. Please up me.
I mean, Ella Baker said freedom is a constant struggle.
Oh my God, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Well, hey, look, what is freedom? I mean, who am I to say? I am a straight white male, who grew up in the abundance of the 1950s in California. I have known nothing but freedom.
Yeah.
In my life, well, within certain bounds. I was, we never had a ton of money, but so I'm the wrong guy. In some ways, I'm the wrong guy to ask.
Yeah.
I mean, freedom has there's a negative side to that also. Charles Manson saw that he had a certain kind of freedom,
Yeah.
as did Hitler. Uh, so, I just look at it from my, the position that I've landed after all these many, many years. And I have, when we finish this discussion, I'll have pretty much the freedom to, walk out the door and do whatever I want.
Yep. Well, what's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Oh, well, they're very, very closely tied. I mean, Henry Hampton at Eisen the Prize used to just hammer on the responsibilities of the government to its citizens and vice versa.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, having spent a lot of my career making movies about these things, I don't have a pat answer for that.
Yeah.
The obvious one is with responsibility comes, or with freedom comes responsibility.
Yeah.
And those are, responsibility is something that we develop, from all the influences around us. We thought about it a lot with working on The Day After Trinity. I mean, anytime you get into the world of nuclear weapons, that's one of the core questions. It's, if you have toddlers in the house, that's the other end of the nuclear war spectrum.
Well, this is good, John, because again, you keep anticipating this, because I did want to go into nuclear weapons through your film. But first, I wanted to ask you one more question in that regard, and you anticipate it, is John Basil Barnhill, sociologist, said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. So the film 2005 V for Vendetta paraphrased the quote. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears like the war on drugs? You can't have a war on drugs because drugs don't fight. And you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. But we have these things where they put on us the war on drug, the war on terrorism, the war on poverty. How do you personally handle false fears?
Well, I make movies about them.
Great.
When we go back to the first part of that question.
Well, you answered it. I mean, it's basically these guys telling you about setting it up, saying about fear. Who should be afraid of who? Well, in essence, shouldn't we be like Rianne Eisler learned from American Buddhists? It should be partnership.
Yeah, why should the government be afraid of the people? Why should the people be afraid of the government? Aren't we, in these thousands of years of trying to sort this out, it would seem that we should, there should be a better binary choice than that. And I think there's a word I'm searching for here. I think it's caution instead of fear.
Caution, really good.
I think the government should be cautious about the people, and the people should be cautious about the government.
Yeah.
Now, there are exceptions, of course. If we're living under Stalin, or we're living under Hitler, or we're living under a couple of possible scenarios in this country, fear may be the opposite, but maybe, caution is just not strong enough to deal with those threats.
Yeah, I like that. And that's what I'm about. I want people to teach me new words. Wording is all what this series is about. And substitute words. Well, I don't like that word. I think it's more like this. So what is the else test? And could you apply it to Oppenheimer?
Oh, yeah, no. Well, the else test for documentary.
Is it only for docs, or is it for both fiction and nonfiction?
Well, it was, I came up with it for documentary, but it applies to both.
Okay.
And it's very, very simple and very serviceable. When the lights come on, or when you close your laptop, what you as a viewer believe to be true should be true, and what you as a viewer believe to be real should be real. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, if I tell you I am John Else, if I tell you I am Joseph Stalin, that's not true.
Yeah.
But if you look at me and you think that is the real John Else, that in fact is real. Yeah. So Oppenheimer, I mean, any fiction film that is obviously a fiction film, we know what's real, and we know that that's not that Cillian Murphy is not really Robert Oppenheimer. We know that tower they built out at Abu Qu is not the real tower with the real bomb on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, any fiction film passes the test. There are a lot of documentaries that don't now, but what I love about that formulation is that it allows in documentary, it allows reenactments, it allows all kinds of narration, it allows animation, as long as the audience knows what it's getting. Okay. In Errol Morris's film, you would never mistake a cheesy B movie reenactment of somebody getting shot with actual verite footage that Errol happened to get on that road in Texas that night. So it passes. In the films of Lourdes Portillo, one of my favorite filmmakers, I mean, she has all these loony reenactments, and they're reenactments. So that passes the test. Yeah, no problem.
Godard said, Hollywood movies are just documentaries of actors acting.
Well, he's correct about that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is actually a record of Matt Damon delivering lines that probably were said by someone else 65, 70 years ago. Yeah. No, I thought that, that's a very insightful comment by a man who's not always insightful.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I worked with my group this morning. I'm interviewing John, and one of our members said, "You got to see Day After Trinity." When Oppenheimer came out, you got to see the real thing, and it really caused me to go, "Well, where is this guy?" Go online, you find your email address, you respond. So I was so honored. So I went back to him today, and I says, "Okay, I'm going to interview part 2. What should I ask John now? What's a deeper question I can ask him?" And I'll tell you something. They were like, was it the tenor of the time that dictates morality? Do you drop moral ethic concerns for an ultra emergency? Is self-defense...
One question at a time here.
No, I know. I'm not even going to ask you these. Is self-defense mandatory? Is in your wheelhouse? So it's like all these things about, I'm trying to figure out, because I never saw Oppenheimer on the big screen. I saw it on the airplane coming back from the Ann Arbor Festival a couple days ago. And it was like, to me, it was just like, it's drama. And I want to know, is this telling me something that Day After Trinity told better? Or is it helping Day After Trinity become more understandable? So here was the bottom line question I got, and you can go wherever you want just to talk about.
Let me answer that first.
Okay, go ahead.
Before I lose the...
Yeah, sorry.
It was Chris Nolan's Oppenheimer you saw on a plane?
Yes.
Okay, well, going from the Ann Arbor Film Festival to Chris Nolan's Oppenheimer, that is like the Olympics of cinematic collision. I have to say, for the record, I liked Chris's film a lot.
Yeah.
Is it perfect? No. But, as we said earlier, it's a 3-hour popcorn movie about a really serious subject, and that's hard to pull off. I'll tell you the main difference between any drama like Nolan's Oppenheimer and any documentary like The Day After Trinity is that we, as documentarians, we can only show what is external, what's on the outside. But Chris Nolan can write dialogue. He can come up with animations that, visualize what's going on inside Oppenheimer's head. He can go behind closed doors for sex scenes. He can put on the screen, shouting matches between Oppenheimer and his wife. He can do all the things that we, as documentary filmmakers, generally cannot do. Sometimes we do, but generally we don't. So that's how they complement each other. The great example there, the perfect example in my mind, is Gus Van Sant's version of Milk, the story of Harvey Milk.
Yeah.
And Rob Epstein and Richard Schmeecken's documentary, The Times of Harvey Milk.
Yeah.
The Times of Harvey Milk, which is the documentary, is constructed almost entirely of public utterances. It's mostly news film of Harvey Milk, whereas in Gus Van Sant's film, it's almost entirely internal. It goes into, Sean Penn / Milk's mind. It goes into his personal life. It goes into his bedroom, all the things. And I think those two together, it makes a hell of a portrait of Harvey Milk.
It flushes it out. So in the big picture, isn't it great Chris did this? Because then maybe will people go, well, I want to find the real story and read the books that he references, because it is pretty dang accurate, don't you think? I mean,
well, no.
Okay, thank you. That's where I wanted to,
let me revise that. It has a lot of accuracy.
Good. That's a better way to put it.
I mean, there really was a variously troubled guy named Robert Oppenheimer, who spent his life wrestling with all kinds of demons. There really was, a Lewis Strauss. There really was a Frank Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
There really was an atomic bomb. And, they got it mostly right. They based it on American Prometheus, book by Marty Sherwin and Kai Bird. Martin Sherwin was, in fact, a good friend of mine, and he was an advisor on The Day After Trinity, which was the very first film about Oppenheimer, by the way. When I started working on it, I was surprised to find that there was no film about Robert Oppenheimer, which was, Oppenheimer kind of fallen off the public radar for some reason. I mean, the reason I hesitated is that, there's a whole mini industry that has cropped up to sort of parse and to nitpick things in Oppenheimer that are not quite right. I mean,
I got you. Yeah.
Robert Oppenheimer actually climbed the tower, why is the scientist who convened the gadget seminar to discuss the morality of the weapon, why is that a woman when in fact it was a physicist named Robert Wilson? So there are lots of, did Einstein do the calculations that showed that atmospheric ignition was unlikely? No, Einstein had nothing to do with it. It was Hans Bethe. So there's lots of stuff like that. Do they matter? Maybe, maybe they do. My concern with the film is, well, it's threefold. Let me count the ways.
Please.
I think there was a missed opportunity in not showing the victims on the ground in Hiroshima.
Good.
I mean, the point of whenever we tell this story about Oppenheimer, and we should all be telling it, new once every generation. I mean, the point is what the damn thing does to human bodies. And I thought that was, if the point is don't do this, why not show what it does? And what it does is horrific.
Yeah.
And, Chris Nolan is a genius, and I'm sure he could figure out ways to make it so that we don't change the channel, we don't look away. I mean, there is a scene in the film where Robert Oppenheimer and the physicists are at Los Alamos, and they're watching a slideshow of people, of disfigured, burned people at Los Alamos, and a physicist is narrating the slideshow. We never see the slides.
Yeah.
You see Oppenheimer's face.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But if we're in that room, why not show us the slides?
Yep.
But that takes, there's another concern I have. First of all, it's not my job to remake Chris Nolan's movie.
Yeah. No, this is
It took in $1 billion, so it's fair game.
this is critical thinking.
Yeah.
This is good.
Would I, should Chris Nolan have bent the story so much toward the internal personal drama of Oppenheimer as a personality and Oppenheimer's struggles with women and the dysfunctionality in the family and his feuds with Lewis Strauss? Did that was that too much? Did it overwhelm the existential problem of the bomb? Now, we talked earlier, you got to keep people watching the movie. People have to stay watching this movie.
Yeah.
And there are all these stowaway ideas like don't use this on people.
Yeah.
So it's and I don't envy his job of trying to balance those. The last thing I'll say is I thought I got nothing against steamy sex in movies. I thought the steamy sex in this movie made the film off limits for a lot of communities that need to see this movie.
Yep.
I think, those of us who make movies about Oppenheimer, there's always the question, where do we put the I am become death line? Which, by the way, Oppenheimer did not utter until several years after the bomb. Where do we put that line? We always choose, at the day after Trinity, we saved it until the very, very end. It's the last thing you see. Nolan decided to put it, in a lovemaking scene before the war.
Yeah.
And what that does is that it's clearly very offensive to the Hindu community. It makes the film off limits for the Hindu community, and there are certainly we have nuclear armed nations now, and which there are a lot of people of the Hindu faith who probably should see this film. I don't mean should in a take your medicine kind of way, but
yeah.
It also makes the film, if you're a Mormon living in Utah, downwind of the Nevada test site, and maybe you're descended from folks who were hammered with fallout in the 1950s and 60s from nuclear testing, you are advised not to see this film. I mean, it's interesting. I went and I read the reviews in the Utah Press and the Deseret News and Salt Lake City Tribune. And the reviewers praised the film, but they said, if you're of the Mormon faith, you should not watch this film.
Wow.
And I think, again, Chris Nolan is one of our greatest living filmmakers. And if anybody could figure out how to do that, it would have been him. So.
Yeah, no, those three were so well articulated. And my friend Joey from the Bronx told me just at the Ann Arbor Film Institute, what's up with that sex scene in there? That he really like that. What? So it was so well done. In the popcorn talk is my film professor at University of Michigan said the popcorn theory. If you serve popcorn to people, they'll like your film more. And Billy Wilder said, I just hope Billy said it best. He says, I just hope they like my film as much as the popcorn, And most people who are intelligent moviegoers for years since it came out would say too long, and so I'm glad how you articulated all that.
For release in India, they put a black slip on the actress in the sex scene.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they with a CGI, they clothed her.
Yeah.
Who was your professor at your?
Who said the popcorn theory? Frank Beaver.
Frank Beaver. Okay.
Yeah, but it was before they had film department. It was in the English department. I had Hugh Cohen, who just passed at 90. I had Marvin Fellheim, Jan Barna taught us Eisenstein, Frank Beaver, and Yeah, it was good, but it wasn't. There was no film department. Now there's a film department there. But we talked about this. Part one is yeah, the similarity of Battle of Algiers and Day After Trinity. How these films were used by the good guys and the bad guys. Whether these different. It was these films are so important that they can be educational or training films for the Black Panthers and for Bush's cronies.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and then I think I told you when they asked Gilo, what does your film teach people, or what do you want? What is it? He says teach people. The question was teach people. He says how to make a film, and so that was his sort of thing. But what feelings or thoughts do you want the audience to get out of Trinity? I mean, the question is not worded perfectly, but sort of like
exactly. Yeah, we thought about that. What I want people to get out of Trinity, that could be me. That could be me.
That could be. Yeah.
Whatever you think about nuclear weapons, whether you think they are, the instrument from hell, or if you think they are the deterrent, which has kept the world from blowing itself up for the last 70 years, you have to understand that given the right crossing of wires, the right set of circumstances, we all are capable of all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
We also saw it, I think, as a popcorn movie in a way. Dave Peoples, it's interesting, David Webb Peoples, while we were doing The Day After Trinity, he's a screenwriter, and he was finishing up, he would never come to work till about 10 in the morning. And I thought it was just because he was a Berkeley hippie and he was going down to Moe's bookstore at night and playing poker with Moe and, those guys. But it turned out he was getting up at about 5 in the morning. He was writing.
Oh my God.
What he was writing was Unforgiven.
Yeah.
He was writing the Clint Eastwood, he was writing a screenplay that became Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. And I think he was also chipping away at what later became Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And so we talked about all these things a lot. I mean, Unforgiven, if you've seen it, it's a Clint Eastwood film that won an Academy Award, directed by Clint Eastwood. And it's about a good guy who does the right thing for the wrong reasons, or a bad guy who does the wrong thing for the right reasons. It's very, very hard to sort out the ethical equation in that film, just as it's hard to sort out the ethical equation in The Day After Trinity. I mean, would I have been on the next train to Los Alamos to help build that bomb in 1942? You bet.
Yeah.
Would I have turned the world upside down to control the weapons in 1945 after Hiroshima? You bet.
Yeah.
Did one of those change the world a lot? Both of them changed the world a lot. The whole story of nuclear weapons, and I'm working on a book now about nuclear testing, and it's a success story in a weird way. I mean, here we are, it's this lovely afternoon in 2024, you're in Venice and I'm in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and we're having this conversation and throwing around quotes from Ezra Pound. And we have not blown ourselves up.
We haven't.
And it's been largely through incredibly numbing, dedicated work by hundreds, dozens of arms control people. And I am actually now reluctantly beginning to understand, I think also from deterrent strategists. I think the jury's still out on both of those, but something worked, and it didn't just by itself.
My friend who's half dead hanging out of a helicopter in Vietnam, he said, the thing about the nuclear bomb is we haven't had one since. And it's why. He says there's so many complications. It's not just one guy with his finger on a red button, which was this tense scene in Op. You saw the red button and the hands shaking. But what you said reminded me of...
that's the kill switch, by the way, that button.
Kill switch.
That's not to set off the bomb. That's to stop the detonation in case the
stop it. Yeah. Okay. Kill switch. Thank you.
It is one guy though. In the president of the United States is the sole sign off.
And this is, part of the questions my friends were saying is it's super active right at this moment. Russian is actively saying we've got a bomb, and Israel is more quietly saying we have a bomb. And then, this is very real right now. And this was the question I said, well, I could ask them this. This was the question it all came to, John, was what is the effect or the hidden psychic effect of the atom bomb on human consciousness?
Oh, well, first of all, I didn't mean to underplay the nuclear danger. Do we have a nuclear threat still? Of course. Is it ramping up?
We do. Yes.
Absolutely. It is with Ukraine and potentially with what's happening in the Middle East. Yeah. I mean, we have a real danger. I do not lose sleep at night worrying about a global nuclear conflagration. I do worry about small, so-called tactical weapons.
Yeah.
What was the question?
What is the I'm sort of adding, what is the effect the atom bomb has had or is on human consciousness? I think you answer. You don't sit around.
Yeah. Well, I'm not Alan Watts, and I'm not Ram Dass, and I can't speak to human consciousness as a spiritual force.
Yeah.
It depends on what half century you're talking about.
Yeah.
I've been writing recently about the effect on human understanding and human frailty and human consciousness, I guess, in the immediate post-war years. And it was profound. I mean, after Hiroshima in the 1950s, there was this profound sense among journalists, among artists, among writers, among political leaders that there had been an unprecedented rip in the moral universe, that Hiroshima and Nagasaki represented something that was far beyond anything that had been imagined ever.
Yeah.
And that danger was there. It pervaded popular culture. It pervaded, journalism. I mean, the number of nuclear mutant horror films in the 1950s is staggering. I mean, whether they're based on science or not is a different question, but the point is people were making them and watching them. Clergy universally were preaching about nuclear weapons. Leaders were concerned. I mean, it finally led to a limited test ban treaty, under JFK in the 60s. So, and I mean, nobody talks about it now. I mean, it's creeping back into American consciousness. But back then, I mean, I saw a bomb. If you were living in the American West in the 1950s and you were willing to get up early, from just about anywhere in the American West, you could see the glow of an atomic bomb. When I was about 9, my dad got me out of bed one morning. We went out in the backyard and we looked over the fence to the south, and 300 miles away at the Nevada test site, the sky lit up orange. And went back down to black. That's, we did duck and cover. Of course, probably did also. We saw all the civil defense films in school. There were shelters, there were fallout shelters. I remember when the signs went up and down on buildings up and down K Street in Sacramento, where I was growing up, with fallout shelter, and those shelters were stocked with food and water, and we all knew it. So it was certainly there in our consciousness, in the sense of what we understood to be around us all the time.
Yeah. It's funny because I just have to mention this. Alex Cox made a student film at UCLA. And those things, you go to the beach and they have a cutout and you put your head in and then you're a muscle man.
Yeah.
It was an art gallery and you go in and the body was a victim at Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Ooh. And you put your head in.
Oh, boy.
Oh my God. Just the thought of it always makes me cringe. But I just did an essay called "Can Art Stop War?"
Oh yeah, tell me about that. Yeah.
And I'm curious, what was your hunch or guess? What was the motive of the cave artist?
Oh, that's an interesting. That's a very interesting question. Those are the first documentaries, by the way, cave art, because the if you go to the Cave of Hands in France, it's all these handprints on the wall,
Yep.
and the artist put his hand on the wall and then blew dust over it. So it's actually an intaglio, it's an imprint of the real thing. The philosophers call it an indexical connection. And that's different from looking at your hand and then drawing a picture of a hand.
Yep.
Okay. So that's the first documentary. I don't know what their motivation was. We'd have to ask them, but
Yeah.
we can't. I know it must have been a hell of a moment when someone suddenly decided, I can represent
Yeah.
somewhere outside of myself.
Yeah.
Those people never saw themselves. There were no mirrors back in the day. They saw other cave people.
Yeah. But this is also
So you tell
yeah.
me, can art stop war?
Well, what I'll send you the essay. It's way too long, and I gave the presentation, and actually it was cool because a lot of a couple nuns and priests showed up in Farmington, Michigan.
Oh, okay.
And I became a political activist being raised Roman Catholic because I started reading Daniel Berrigan, and he put poetry and was willing to do nonviolent protesting. So yeah, was he effective? I want to believe he's effective, and I want to believe it, but the article kind of concludes at the end. No, art can't stop war, but people can. And, it's all that Sidney Lumet quote I use. Films don't do diddly squat, but it ain't going to keep me from trying,
Right. Yeah.
And that's a beautiful statement because, we manifest, we become what we behold. John, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Well, it's not a binary choice.
Yeah.
I think you can, in successful human society, both get exercised.
Yeah.
But again, that's one for the moral philosophers. I'm happy to live in the tension between those two. There is a tension.
That's it.
We did a film about that actually in Eyes on the Prize about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964 tried to upend the Democratic Convention that year, and it ended in a compromise. And a lot of people were very angry at the compromise. And the people in the political system kept saying, well, that's how it works.
Yeah.
And the folks who would risk their lives to come from Mississippi said, well, not for us.
Yeah.
We've been at this too long. Yeah. It's interesting. I was not raised Catholic, but I have always had an enormous respect for the Berrigans, for the liberation theology folks.
Yeah.
If you drive from Santa Fe to Los Alamos now, you get about 2/3 of the way up there in this beautiful Pueblo country next to the San Ildefonso Pueblo. And there's a giant billboard. And the billboard says, possession of nuclear weapons is immoral.
Oh.
And it's Pope Francis.
Oh, my God. I love it.
So, as I look around, it's interesting. I grew up I came of political age in the 1960s. And the church of all most denominations, Unitarians, Catholics, Jews, were enormously visible and active, and were engaged in political discourse, and in stopping the war in Vietnam, trying to stop the war in Vietnam, and trying to achieve some modicum of human rights in the South.
Yeah.
I look around now and I think, well, wait a minute, where's the church? Where's William Sloane Coffin? Where are the Berrigans? I understand the church. When we say the church, it's not a monolith by any means. It never has been. But I mourn the absence of clergy in, the current debates that are.
Yeah. You
Right.
you you brought up that word mystery in part one, and I want to go into that, but it's like I get inspired by these people who set up like QR codes, or they go into Starbucks and they order 200 coffees, and then they have to yell the names of these victims. I mean, these things, and then they get in the news, and I'm like, that inspires me. That is subversive art using the medium, like the Weather Underground used Walter Cronkite. He worked for the Weather Underground. He would go, today the Weather Underground blew up a building, and here's why. And he reads their manifesto.
That's where, I am always dubious about art affecting politics
Yeah,
because of who sees the art.
yeah,
I'm always,
yeah,
but what you've hit on something very, very important, that the Weather Underground, like the civil rights movement, was genius in finding the lever that you could pull. And the lever very often in a democracy involves the press. It involves getting Walter Cronkite to repeat your message. It involves getting, the press to come out in Birmingham, Alabama, when the sheriff is sicking the dogs and the fire hoses on
yep,
people. If that happened in the back alley, I mean, the whole reason for, taking all those white kids to Mississippi in '64 was to bring the press.
yep.
The press didn't give a damn about another young black man dying. They would follow if there were young white folks that were going down in jeopardy. So the Weather Underground, I mean, they were masters. They were masters of that.
Yeah, my friend is Medea Benjamin's boyfriend, Ty, and he dressed up as the head of a Ku Klux Klan guy, and he's basically a professional political activist in DC. Like all the cops say, "Oh, good to see you, Ty. How's the wife and kids? I'm gonna beat the shit out of you today, but oh, good to see you." And they bust him one day, and they pull off his KKK big puppet head, and he goes, "You can't arrest me, I'm white." And it went viral, and just to see this kind of thing. So, I know I have trouble with it because it's culture jamming and playfulness, and then people just go ha ha ha, then they just, it's just like what Jon Stewart did to the news. It's like, did satire news, does it in the long run more activate us or more pacify us?
Well, that's an interesting, I mean, that's an interesting question. If you purchase and read a really good book about social justice, do you then convince yourself that you've done something for social justice? If you watch The Day After Trinity, have you actually done anything to control nuclear arms? And I think we increasingly convince ourselves that we have. And it's shit. If I have to go to one more party where everybody talks for hours about Donald Trump that doesn't do a damn thing, scream. I mean, it really, it can be Donald Trump or whoever is your demon of the moment. I mean, talk is, although, I mean, did Picasso's Guernica inspire people? Of course.
Yeah. And there's a new doc on Tom Wolfe that I also watched on the plane twice, going there and back. It's called Radical Wolf, and they go deep into the radical chic, where the Black Panthers had the party with Leonard Bernstein, and then it caused a controversy. So did it get people talking about an issue? And that's. But I wanted to ask you, John. George Manupel, who started the Ann Arbor Film Festival, his mantra was ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff is just coming through me. Is art making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Well, I think it's both.
Yeah.
It's also a vehicle for what has gone down over the preceding 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And when we were doing The Day After Trinity, we all read Hamlet.
Oh, really? Wow.
To bomb or not to bomb, that is the question. Uh, I mean, American Prometheus is named after, the Greek god who stole fire
Yeah.
from the Greek, who's the Greek, the mortal who stole fire from the gods. I mean, I think Faust would have been a better choice probably, but what was the question?
Well, basically, you answered it. You said both, but can art making be egoless?
Yeah. Be egoless. No, I mean, I think, let's not kid ourselves. How can well, I don't know. There are Buddhists who have
Yeah.
been to erase their ego. And I'm sure there are probably monks who have, Catholic monks who have erased their own ego. I'm not capable of that. Perhaps you are.
No, I'm not. I'm just curious because is perception reality?
It's the best we have.
Got it. I love that answer. I've gotten that answer before. I love that answer.
It's funny. I've been trying. I'm inspired by reading stuff that I can't quite understand.
Oh, that is great.
Yeah, seriously. I just find that the frustration, all the friction and the smoke coming out of my ears when I try to I'm reading a book now called The Philosophy of Particle Physics, and I could barely hang on. But a buddy gave me a book called The Magicians, and it's about Wittgenstein and Adorno,
right,
and Dasein, and is reality. And I find who gives a shit? I mean, we have a world, and we have to deal with the world in the moment.
Yeah.
You have to figure out, how to cut the wood to heat the house with, and we have to figure out, how to write that sentence at the end of this chapter in the book, and we have to figure out how to do something that's going to make a difference in Gaza. And it seems to me that I just don't have the patience or the ability or the time to worry about whether reality exists or not. I mean, I vividly remember in college, I remember being in calculus, and I remember getting to fourth order differential equations. And there was a moment when I said, I am never going to understand these.
Yeah.
And it was both energizing and liberating and profoundly depressing that I'd found the wall beyond which I could not go.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about reality and, does it exist?
Yeah. And John, this is great because tell me one major element of your creativeness, your calling that's changed, and one major element that stayed the same in the years you've been doing this.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, in my line of work, that is documentary film, everything has changed and nothing has changed.
Yeah.
The technology, of course, your iPhone makes better video than the $150,000 camera that I had 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I mean, that's like no brainer. That's just, we burned that bridge. Has that made documentary filmmaking better?
Yeah.
Maybe. Has it made documentary filmmaking cheaper? No, it has not. For mainstream documentary, I mean, there's a lot of blather about how first little camcorders and then cell phones would democratize mainstream documentary, and anyone could make a movie now. A fifth grade girl in Omaha, Francis Coppola said, could make a great documentary. Well, not really. I mean, all the mainstream, if you look at like the 100 most viewed documentary films of last year, I mean, on average, they cost $500,000. The cost is still in the money, in the people. The cost is in archive rights. The cost is in post-production, editing, all those things that are after the capturing of even the capturing of the image. My son's a director of photography, and he's on a show, right? He's shooting the new Spinal Tap, actually. And
Is he really?
camera is this thing that is like, it's this behemoth. It's like holding a Model A Ford on your shoulder. It's this
Yeah.
giant camera, and it costs probably $250,000. So I don't mean,
Wow.
I mean, there are some exceptions to that. There are fantastic,
Yeah.
by a filmmaker named Spencer Nakasako, who's the guy who actually invented the first successful job of teaching people in marginalized communities to make films about themselves. If you're going to see one film this year, track down a film called AKA Don Bonus.
I will.
A Cambodian refugee kid living in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. And it is as moving as whatever $30 million film was made that year. And it's shot with a little camcorder.
Wow. John, tell your son, when Harry Shearer, the bass player for Spinal Tap, when they test screening the first Spinal Tap, someone wrote on the card, "Good film, but you should have got a better rock band." Okay, Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally told to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Oh, I have no weaknesses.
Very good.
I don't know what alien motion is. I'm trying. That's a fascinating question. I can't come up with an answer. I mean, I have tons of weaknesses. I can't find one that I've turned into a strength. I think if you are privileged to lead a relatively trauma-free life with relative prosperity in a relatively functioning community all your life, I'm not sure that you turn those corners. I have plenty of friends who have turned their addiction into their great strength.
Yeah.
Have turned their fear of death into their great strength.
Well, that's a good one right there. Can you forget to die?
Can you forget to die? It's not up to us, is it? I mean, it's not like you put it on your calendar.
It's not up to us. That's good.
Kurt Vonnegut wrote a great story about suicide parlors. They were like Howard Johnson's.
Yeah.
And you'd call up and you'd just get your name on the schedule. And when it came time to check out, you'd go and they'd feed you a great meal and give you some great drugs, and that would be it.
Whoa. Did you see the Kurt Vonnegut doc?
I have not. No.
Robert Whitey. Yeah. That's 40 years in the making. I'd love to get your reactions. John,
reaction when I hear 40 years in the making, my first reaction is, "Oh, you poor baby." God, when I was
go ahead.
Starting in documentary, there was this folk tale that we all knew, and it was about a guy who was making this film called The Hudson Tigers, and it was a portrait of a high school football team, and he had started on it. And he couldn't quite raise the money. And then he did some more filming and he couldn't quite raise the money. And this thing went on we heard it for years.
Yeah.
Finally, it ruined his marriage. And then he tried to finish the film and he borrowed money and he went bankrupt and he lost his house. Yeah. And we were constantly looking over your shoulder to make sure you weren't trying to make the Hudson Tigers.
That's it.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. Your friend obviously finished.
Yeah, no, it's not my friend. I mean, he made, he sort of specializes in the comedy guys. He made the doc on, really good doc, the best on Lenny Bruce, on Woody Allen, on the Marx Brothers. Oh. And it's just that he formed a relationship with Kurt, so he struggled after Kurt died. Yeah. It's sort of like Arthur Miller's daughter did the same thing. She had all this great footage of Arthur, and then when he died, it was a struggle. She didn't want to sit there and work with them. Yeah. But it is a thing where people, I saw a USC student ask Michael Moore at a Q&A, how has filmmaking affected your life personally? And he goes, it ruined my life. Now, there's more to it, but it's like when you're walking down the street and you got to have a bodyguard because people come up and throw hot coffee on you, and the bodyguard takes the hot coffee on his skin instead of you.
Yeah.
You don't want people attacking you and killing you for your art. So whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Did I ever tell you about trying to have supper with Robert Redford?
Tell me.
Well, I did a film about Yosemite National Park.
Yeah.
For Sundance, and Redford was actually he worked in a restaurant at Yosemite when he was in college, and he's a long time promoter of the park. And there's an interesting story there with Native Americans and whatnot. So we got the film finished. It was narrated. It was actually a diary from the 19th century of one of the first whites to go into Yosemite Valley, and so Redford read the narration, and we went and we did he flew up on his own nickel from LA. He made it to the studio at Fantasy Records in Berkeley. We did this late night recording session, finished about 9 o'clock at night. And Bob said, well, let's go get something to eat. So we went and we got in my little 1965 Volkswagen Bug.
Yeah.
We drove into downtown Berkeley, and we went into there was sort of a fern bar restaurant called the French Cafe.
Yeah.
Parked the car, went into the French Cafe, and there were like 40 people in there. It was like 9:30 at night, and 40 sets of eyes went. they were not looking at me. Redford, right? So we turned around and walked out. Drove down to a Hofbrau, Larry Blake's Hofbrau, parked the car, walked over to the Hofbrau. But now Redford had his collar up. He had a baseball cap on, and he had dark glasses. Okay. So we walked into the Hofbrau, and it was like 40 sets of eyes.
Oh, no.
Magnet. We turned around and walked out, and we ended up parking my car on the street. I went into McDonald's and I got 2 cheeseburgers, walked to 7-Eleven, and I got a 6-pack of beer. And we had a beer and a cheeseburger sitting in my car on the street in Berkeley at 10 o'clock. And he said, I can't go anywhere. I can't go to an airport. I can't go to a restaurant. Yeah.
Amazing.
Wow.
Well, it goes, John, anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Well, when it finds a productive lever.
Yeah.
When it finds a productive, what's the term? There's another, I was about to say it finds the right light socket to stick its finger in, but that's not it.
Well, I like productive lever. That is when it finds its, well, productive is the key word there. That's good. You flip it.
I mean, I mean, if you're going back into, if you're talking about anger causing something productive, I mean, there's a lot of, the rage of Achilles.
Yeah.
Inspires the Greeks to, get their mojo on, and to, I think anger more likely misfires, more likely.
It more often misfires using anger.
I haven't kept track of all the anger in human history. Yeah. I think often yes. I'm getting out of my depth here. I'm not an expert.
No, you're not. You anticipate. This is one of the questions I changed. I used to say, can anger be a productive emotion? George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, he says all emotions can be productive and non-productive. And then my friend said, no, change it. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank. And some people have gone fill in the blank. They go, it can't be a productive emotion. They flip back to the original question without even knowing it. So it is. But this is similar. There's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, says he morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve, Louis Buñuel said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." So this whole thing about, not saying you, like John, one creates what one resists, or you create what you resist. What's your thought on that line?
I don't know. That's a tricky one. You create what you resist. I mean, there's a little bit of me that says it's sort of flippant bullshit.
Yeah, it's good. I like
Um, but I mean, if you're, give me an example.
Well, it is funny because I find Buñuel and Zappa are both kind of him saying, "Oh, thank God I'm an atheist." They
Yeah,
both,
I love that. I love that. Yeah,
yeah, they both kind of hate the church or hate being raised Catholic, but that's half their work is all about that. So they're using their work to get it out of their system. So
right.
it's just this thing: what you resist persist.
Yeah. I'm still waiting to go through teenage rebellion. I mean, I was blessed that other people did it for me.
That's good. Yeah. No, I asked this. Yeah, I love to work with younger people, and I said, "Did you ever take LSD?" And this woman goes, "Oh, I let my dad do that."
Well, there you go.
Like, I don't need to do that.
I like that. Yeah, that's good.
John, how do you find peace of mind?
Oh, I split wood.
Oh, that's right. You told me that.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is
in the
amazing.
woods. Um,
Not with an
well,
automatic wood splitter. You use your own.
all these things change
Yeah.
over your lifetime. Um, it depends a lot on what the political temperature of the nation is. I mean, my greatest peace of mind was probably that just deliriously wonderful false sense I had the morning after Barack Obama was elected. I mean, I was just, if I thought, oh, I have died and gone to heaven.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, good luck with that. But no, physical work. I
Yeah.
mean, the plumbing. Splitting the wood. I'm putting in. The gate on the fence broke, and I'm having to dig out a whole big fence post and fix that. That's. I mean, it's the same as I guess some people. Well, I was about to say people uh, dance for some people. Music. I play music. That helps, but mainly just physical activity.
Yeah.
The physical activity that is not, it's not rote. I mean, I swim laps, and that, but if you're splitting wood, you got to fucking pay attention.
Yeah.
You got to really, there's no brain room left over to be complaining and miserable.
Yeah.
It's all about swinging the maul and hitting exactly the right spot.
Yeah. Okay, these are 5, just a few more and we're out of here. Thank you so much, John. These are 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. 1, who started it all?
Who started it all? What's the it?
Very good. You answered a question with a question. That's what the series is all about. Number 2, are we going to make it?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I say that as someone who has spent a lot of my life making movies about catastrophe, about nuclear war,
Yeah.
about environmental catastrophe, about civil unrest. I think we will. Yeah. Now, that's different from will we all make it?
Yeah. Very good. 3, where do we put it?
What's it?
Yeah, well, that's fine. You can do it. 4, who's cleaning it up?
Oh, well, yeah, we are.
There you go.
I mean,
5,
Dave, people's definition of a irresponsible scientist was some guy who comes in and shits on the rug and leaves it for someone else to clean up.
yeah. The 5th Alan Watts question is it serious?
Well, he's no dope, that Alan Watts. Uh, Well, it's a trifecta of it. What's the it?
Yeah.
We used to. I grew up on KPFA radio and Pacifica radio.
Love it.
We used to listen to Alan Watts. Beautiful. And I was amazed when I first heard him.
Yeah.
That he had a British accent.
Yeah. And to talk about it, he was a womanizer and an alcoholic, but he says, I'm an entertainer, and we still listen on Pacifica down here in LA. They play him every Sunday. It's like a religious, it's like a ritual for me. And so if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Oh, that's a sensational question. Don't forget to grow.
Beautiful. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Ask Alan Watts.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
If I have to raise one more dollar, I'm going to scream.
That is a good title. Now, John, they want to scent the glue in the binding of your autobiography. What smell?
Oh, what smell?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, Duff.
What is it?
You know what Duff is?
D-O-F-F?
No, D-U-F-F.
D-U-F-F. Tell me.
Duff is forest floor.
Oh, I love that.
Walk in the woods, and there's that. If it's summertime, there's that crunchy, decaying leaves. If you do it in the wintertime around here, it's almost silent. It's like walking on velvet, but it has a smell. It's a combination of, it's this perfume of decay and new life, and it changes from season to season. I mean, I suspect one can experience the same thing probably, in an urban setting.
Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of smells that are, I'm sure, distinctive of Venice, California, where you are.
Yeah. Well, I had a piece of grass grow in my bicycle once, down by the kickstand, there was a little dirt and I says, this is amazing.
Yeah. I have grass growing in my pickup truck every spring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Oh, God. Well, it would be made of chocolate.
Oh, nice. Milk or dark?
Oh, no, milk chocolate. Well,
okay.
Half and half. Half and half.
Okay, yeah. And where do you want it displayed?
Well, I would display it probably in the courtyard at the Graduate School of Journalism at Berkeley, and all the grad students could get a little buzz from it.
I love it. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Never had and never want?
Yeah, it's good. You never had it, but you never want it.
Well, again, you're talking to a guy who had all the privileges, and we were never rich, but we were never wanting.
Yeah.
I mean, they're abstract goods, but I would all want them. Yeah, I would want, lasting peace on earth, but I would certainly want that.
Yeah, you want it. It's good, but you never had it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was, I don't, good. No, I can't think of, I'm drawing a blank on that. That's
all right. Let's move on. We just got a few more. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Slumdog Millionaire. I first thought you said if you were in Nevada vomit.
Nevada, that's a good mishearing.
Writing about bombs in Nevada.
Yeah.
I probably, I can't think what I would do. I hope I never have to find out.
Well, I've had that answer once. Someone go, I wouldn't be in a situation like that. But the gentleman who taught me that was like a Damon Runyon kind of guy, and had amazing life. And he says it's sort of like a metaphor for life in some ways. You're in a vat of vomit and people throwing shit at your face. So
Yeah.
what's the what's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Hmm. Huh. That's uh, I keep, this is not a cultural shift, but I'm always inspired by young kids,
Yeah.
4-year-olds,
Yeah.
6-year-olds, limiting screen time for children.
There you go.
You know,
Limited screen time. Okay. What's a question that remains unresolved for you?
I mean, the flip answer is, where is Jimmy Hoffa? That doesn't count. That's not like, a couple of serious guys having a serious.
Well, I want to have fun. I'm like, the one question I asked early on part one was, what do you want God to tell you after you die? And I'm like, who killed Kennedy? You know?
Yeah, well, but don't know. I should have an answer to that, and I don't.
All right, John, the guy goes to the guru and he says, what's the best question I can ask you? And the guru goes, the one you just asked me.
Yeah, the one you just asked me. Yeah,
Yeah.
There you go.
Because you don't want to have that. You don't want to even name the question. You want to keep pursuing it. One word that stood out in part one I loved was mystery. And you said you like the mystery in the ritual in some of these other religions that you didn't get as a Unitarian.
Yeah.
And I thought that's amazing, because one of my favorites is Auden, the poet, saying the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. So that's the funny thing in your world, documentary filmmaking, you want to activate people, but it might pacify them. But it's not up to you to, have, who was it? Rod Sterling. He says someone committed a murder after watching one of his shows. And he says, I don't write to my audience, I write for them, and they can do whatever they want with it. So if they do something bad, you can't say that caused someone to do that, but it's part of the zeitgeist.
Yeah, that's tricky territory, though. I mean, if did Trump's remarks after the Charlottesville?
Oh yeah.
That's the question at the core of all these Oppenheimer movies and books.
Yeah.
I just made the bomb. Don't ask me what.
Yeah. I asked everybody 2 weeks ago when Trump says bloodbath. I said, not how you perceived him using that word, but how did he use that word, literally or metaphorically? And this one person said he doesn't even know what a metaphor is. But let's chalk it up. He knows what a metaphor is.
Yeah. I mean, if it's prompts to bad action, I think you always have to take the worst case.
Yeah. It's called causality, basically. So, how has making films shaped your behavior?
Oh, well, it's been enormously, we all complain. We just all, you get in a crew van with a bunch of documentary filmmakers going somewhere to location. Everybody starts bitching and moaning and complaining about this director and that director. But it's just been, it's been enormously satisfying.
Yeah.
uh, for something that no one considered as a way to spend your life when I was young.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. You kidding? You get paid most of the time, to
Yeah.
go to these incredible places to experience these intense uh, moments in human life. You get to hang out with nobody makes documentaries about boring people.
Yeah.
I mean, some people do, but I think it's not intentional.
Yeah.
I mean, I cannot imagine, a better way to spend 50 years. Well, 40 years. I would not want to repeat the 20 years that I spent raising money.
Yeah.
That was just a horror show. Terrible. And it actually finally in the end kind of drove me out of doing what I do. But the actual and see, I understand. I actually had the benefit of working both as a cinematographer, camera operator, and as a director.
Yeah.
So I got to go out on these shoots with other directors.
Yeah.
It was like, I was never a star. I was like a side man, good side man. You get to play with Frank Zappa, you get to play with Darius Milhaud, you get to play with,
Yeah.
lucky you get a night with the Rolling Stones, you get a night with, Paul Anka, you're just all over and that was the way it was doing camera work.
Yeah. Well, when did you shoot with Frank?
I never did.
Oh, you were just saying that one, but the
In
but
my
the other ones did you work with Paul Anka on a project?
No. I was making all those up.
Oh,
No.
making them all up. That's
I
fine.
mean, I did a lot of music. I did a lot with Bobby McFerrin. I did a lot with the Grateful Dead.
Oh, nice.
Um, I did a ton of opera stuff. Um, I in fact did work with Al Maisels and with Barbara Koppel and
Right.
and with Terry Swigoff and a bunch of really great directors. No, I was fantasizing.
Oh, that was good because the Dead are a perfect example because that guy who made the 4-hour doc on the Dead
Yeah,
was so it was really good. But that one part where they dosed the British the news cameraman without their permission, that was like
I
what
got
you did without them telling you. Yeah. And
yeah,
that was heavy that he left he put that in the film.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought that was important.
Yeah, no,
You
I
know?
will never forgive them. Did we talk about that last time?
No, we didn't, but that is, yeah, you won't forgive him. Yeah. Yeah.
I did a lot of shooting with them over the years, and my wife and I were not into LSD. We were
Yeah.
not even any kind of drugs.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and there's a great film called the Grateful Dead movie,
Yeah.
and um,
I know that film. I showed it in 4-track stereo. You mean the one Jerry and Leon directed?
Leon directed it. Yeah, well,
You
Leon
did,
was present
did
there.
you shoot it? Did you shoot some of that or
I was one of many cameras on it.
wow.
Uh,
It's one of my favorite. I
I
love
was,
it.
the Dead were notorious for having a lot of drugs backstage, and they
Yeah.
were also
Yeah.
notorious for dosing people. And so we shot for a week at Winterland in San Francisco. Every night I came and I brought a bag lunch, and I brought something to drink of my own, so that I would not get dosed.
Yeah.
But you go into the green room, and they were dusting the doorknobs with LSD. There were the fruit in the green room. Somebody pointed out there were hypodermic marks in the apples. And About halfway through the evening, I got sort of weirded out, and my assistant got sort of weirded out. He slipped on some vomit or something, and we fell down a flight of stairs. Um, Camera went flying, smashed on the ground on the stairs. I left the concert at, I don't know, at like midnight, and I arrived home about 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. I had no idea how I got home.
Wow.
Like blank, yeah. Uh, and so I thought it was kind of criminal. I mean, I'm a huge Dead fan. Don't get me wrong. I think they're
But it's no, it's not right. Yeah.
yeah, all right, yeah. I mean, it's it's a massacre of the innocents.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunate. And this is documentary truth. That's what I'm saying, that at least he left that in. He's like, oh no, we couldn't put that in. So I
Yeah,
did like that they left that in.
yeah, I
Okay,
love that. So Amir Bar-Lev is the director, and I thought he did a great job with it.
he did a great job.
There's a lot of dark stuff about the Dead toward the end of
Yep.
that, when the wheels are starting to fall off, and there's a lot of violence at the
Oh, and one of my favorite moments is when all the Dead guys go to Jerry and say, hey, will you sign this form? Because we don't want kids coming to a city unless they have a ticket. And he goes, I'm not going to sign that form. I started this band so people could have fun and dance. And I thought that showed you the integrity of Jerry in a way, you know.
Yeah, what a guy.
Yeah.
Well,
So two more here and we're out of here. Thank you, John. This is Thornton Wilder. Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 4 hours. Thank you. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
well, Thornton Wilder had a lot of secrets to to deal with.
That's it, right. You're going to the source.
Yeah, I don't,
But I mean, basically, the quote kind of is deceiving in setting up the question. So it's sort of implying that you have a secret that you haven't told. Now tell me what it is. But basically, it's like in your life, what you've learned, what's it really all about for you?
well, there is no secret. I mean, there is no secret that I told you everything.
That's it. We brought that up. You know, Bob Dylan said, don't ever tell anyone everything you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude,
Yeah.
you are so generous with what you're teaching me. So go ahead.
I found over the years that the least interesting people are the people about which there is no apparent secret.
Yes.
There's nothing left to discover there. That has always sort of left me cold.
Yeah.
I mean, my work has always been, taking the external world and putting it into my composter.
Yeah.
Putting it into my meat grinder, putting it into my metaphor.
Yes.
Churning it back out in a way that I hope adds something and that, gives people some understanding of it.
Yeah.
But, the things I make movies about, they never come from the inside. It's interesting. I've never thought about that before. I guess a little bit with nuclear weapons because it was so much part of everyone's upbringing. But, I mean, I haven't made a film about my prison time. I haven't made a film about my addiction. I haven't made a film about, my parents' divorce. I mean, none of which I have in my history.
Yeah.
I have actually a very boring mid-century history. So there's not a lot of fertile ground to plumb there. I was never I was never really in combat in a war zone. I've been in war zones, but I was not in Vietnam. I was, so unfortunate. I never thought about this before.
But I think
autobiography would not be that interesting. I think
But I think it's interesting when you told me about the cat incident when you were a little kid.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And then the fact that you met your wife when you were both how old?
Oh, she was 6 months and I was about a year and a half. Yeah, it was in the same place where I tried to drown the cat, by the way. There's convergence there of the best and the worst of me.
My friend Alfred Johnson wrote a song called Born in Love. And it's exactly, I'll send you a copy someday. Or it's what me and my wife sort of envisioned because we were born within a few months, but we didn't meet each other until we were in our 30s or 40s. But it's like you look over in the other baby pin and you fall in love as a baby and then you grow up. And it actually happened to you in a way.
We were blessed though that from the time we were about 12 until we were 20 something, we didn't see each other.
Oh, I see.
That's the way to do it. Let me tell you, if you have to do it over again,
Oh,
be
12 to 20. You did not.
something like that, 10 to 20. So during all those tumultuous years, those torn years when it's so hard to grow up and you turn into such a jerk, into such an impossible creature for anyone, including your parents and your family, to be around. We didn't see each other during any of that.
Wow.
And then we emerged as fully formed, delightful human beings, and the rest is history. We're still, here we are.
The rest is history and her story. Okay, John, what gives you the most optimism?
Oh, probably little kids.
Yeah.
Toddlers. I love hanging out with toddlers.
Yeah.
Partly just for all the just obvious reasons. And toddlers have a kind of wonderful sense of morality. They also have a wonderful nastiness about them that's at war with their sense of reality. Also, frankly, in broad global political sense, the trajectory of arms control, which nobody thinks about anymore, that actually gives me a lot of optimism. The fact that, in some ways, the story of arms control over the last 60 years is an operating manual for climate change.
Yeah.
If humans can get together and face what was a dead serious existential problem in the late 50s, early 60s. You have no idea how close we came to obliterating life on the planet. If people can get together and do that work for all those decades, just slogging away in the trenches of the think tanks and the trenches of the Pentagon and the trenches of Congress and in Moscow and worldwide, because people saw a job that needed to be done against terrible odds. That's a reason to rejoice. That's, there were 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. 70,000. Think about that. And most of those were vastly larger than the Hiroshima bomb. So that's my pet optimism right now.
Yeah. Well, it's well put, John, because most people say the youth, young children, you said toddlers, beautiful. And I agree with that. It always inspires me to hear that. And, you brought up, I have to add a bonus question because we didn't cover it, is I'm so intrigued by your interest in voter registration, which is something Frank Zappa put out his record, Fillmore East record. He says, register to vote and vote.
Oh,
and
really?
And he had voter registration in the lobby in his concerts in the 80s. Wow. And that's like bold for that's they rock the vote. Rockers try to get people to vote, and right now it's a no-brainer. If Taylor Swift and Beyonce say go vote because the government is going to have their hands on your body, that's a big chunk that might get the whatever. This is the problem. They go, I'm not going to vote because I got to vote for the lesser of two evils. And if I vote, it's encouraging them. And if God wanted us to vote, he would have created candidates. And I hear all that. And now they're non-committed voting. It's like, dude, get real. We have to vote. And how do you find the courage to go out and convince people just to register to vote? And then what's your approach, or what's behind that? Because isn't it a discouraging kind of pursuit?
No, quite the opposite. I mean, first of all, I mean, we don't make the rules. You're stuck with these candidates,
Yeah.
and you let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You know what I mean? You mean these are the two guys, and we have to choose between the two of them. I'm going to devote a lot of this next 6 months to making sure that Joe Biden gets elected. Um, you know, going out and registering voters is one of the most inspiring things you can do. If you've never worked in a political campaign, man, have at it. Um, I'm out there. I do it through some campaign, through, in this case, through congressional campaigns out in the Central Valley of California that are, they're swing districts where there's a chance of losing the district or winning it back. And I go out and a lot of it is with young people. It's at community colleges. Um, sometimes I'm there with my clipboard in the parking lot at Walmart. Um, and Most of the people that I'm registering are first time voters. They're people who've just turned 18. They're recent immigrants. A lot of those Central Valley towns have, fairly good sized Afghan populations. They have fairly good sized Iraqi populations, Central American populations. These are folks who've just gotten their citizenship. And you'd be out there all day and you only register 4 voters or 10 voters. But by the end of the day, I'm walking on air. One district where I did voter registration in one of the previous electoral cycles, there were 50,000 votes cast. The Democratic candidate flipped the district from Republican to Democrat by 500 votes. So if I registered 100 people that summer, I will go to my grave a happy man. We were talking about levers earlier. Elections have consequences, and I have no patience with people who deny that. Elections have consequences, and if you can make a difference in the election, have at it.
Do so. That's amazing, John.
I had no idea that Zappa was involved in.
Yeah.
It's because he seems on the face of it a sort of a guy who kind of checked out of the system.
He was more a libertarian, but he was anti-war. He was pro civil rights. He hosted a party like Bernstein, a party for the Black Panthers once, and it's not in any of the Zappa history books. Anyways, he wrote an anti-Jesse Jackson song. He wrote an anti-union song, but he wasn't, he was a satirist. He was he had women and blacks in his band all the time. He was always many things, but to just say, I think we should go vote is important. And, I do too. And I really respect you for doing that. And I really, thank you for this time you spent with me, because I learned so much. Because the first question I asked in part 1 is, what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Okay. Yeah.
And the last question is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, which is, what gives you the most optimism? And he said, other people. So it's been an amazing, enlightening experience for me to spend this time with another person, especially because it was you, John. And, literally, I learned so much, and it felt so natural in flowing with you. So I thank you so much.
Well, back at you. It's been absolutely delightful. And let's keep the conversation going. Let's.
I'll invite you to our salons. We'll have like a salon on Herzog or on documentary filmmaking every once in a while, and we get going with a few more voices of people.
Yeah.
Really, you'd really appreciate some of these people. And even though I'm going to hit the end, and I thank you for all the recommendations. You hooked me up with a lot of great people. I got Peter Sellers coming up, and
great.
Really appreciate all those. And John, even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, I hope this never ends truly and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much.
Forever and ever.
Yes.
Okay. See you, man.
Well,